Millennials aren't avoiding the decision to have kids. They're avoiding the sentence that starts the decision. Ask a couple in their late 20s if they want children someday, and most of them have an answer ready. Ask them when they last said that answer out loud to each other, in a real conversation, with a real timeline attached. That's where it gets quiet. Call it the postponed conversation. Not indecision about children. Indecision about discussing children, out loud, with the one person the decision actually involves. And the data on intentions has been sliding for over a decade now. In 2012, adults in their 20s and 30s planned to have 2.3 kids on average. By 2023, that number had dropped to 1.8. That's not one generation suddenly deciding it hates children. That's a slow leak, one postponed conversation at a time, compounding across an entire cohort. Take a guy, 29, product manager, 3 years into a relationship. He's brought up wanting kids to his therapist 4 separate times this year. He's brought it up to his girlfriend 0 times. Same relationship, same year. 2 completely different conversations, 2 completely different levels of risk. Here's the actual mechanism underneath the avoidance. The kid talk isn't scary because of the topic itself. It's scary because it's one of the only relationship conversations that comes with a built-in deadline. Most milestones can drift without consequence. Moving in together can happen whenever it happens. A wedding date can slip a year and nobody treats that as a crisis. But do we want kids, and when, carries a biological clock inside the question, which means saying it out loud forces a real decision faster than either person feels ready to make one. So the sentence stays unsaid, sometimes for years, because saying it converts a vague future into a specific deadline, so people root around it instead of through it. They don't discuss the topic directly. They gesture at it sideways and hope the gesture counts as communication. A joint savings account gets opened and quietly labeled future. Neither person deposits into it consistently. Neither person says out loud what it's actually for. It just sits there, doing the emotional work of a conversation nobody's willing to have. The financial anxiety attached to all of this is real, and it happens to give people a socially acceptable reason to stall indefinitely. Almost a quarter of millennials without kids point directly to money as the reason they're planning to stay that way. But money is also a convenient shield to hide behind. It's a lot easier to say, we can't afford it yet, than it is to say, I don't actually know if I want this future with you specifically. One of those sentences is about a spreadsheet. The other one is about the relationship itself. People will happily discuss the spreadsheet for years rather than touch the second sentence once. Uncertainty compounds the avoidance further, and it's bigger than most people assume. Only 30% of childless adults surveyed in 2025 said they were certain they wanted kids at all, ever. Another 44% landed somewhere between genuinely unsure and actively leaning against it. That's not a population of people who already know the answer and are simply too scared to say it out loud. A huge chunk of them don't have the answer yet, which makes the entire conversation feel premature to start, even while the calendar keeps insisting otherwise. There's a specific reason not knowing feels harder to admit than knowing. Saying, I don't want kids is at least a position. Someone can respond to a position. Saying, I genuinely don't know, hands the other person nothing to respond to. No timeline, no plan, no way to move the relationship forward on this particular question. So instead of admitting the uncertainty out loud, people quietly wait for the feeling to resolve itself before bringing it up at all. It rarely resolves on any convenient schedule. It usually just gets overtaken by other decisions first. A lease renewal, a job change, another year quietly passing, until the waiting itself has become the actual decision, without anyone signing off on it. There's a version of this same pattern that shows up at work, and it's almost funny how mismatched the effort is. Someone will rehearse a raise negotiation for a full week, script the exact phrasing out loud in the shower, pick the right Tuesday to ask when their manager seems relaxed. That same person will let 18 months pass without ever raising the timeline question with their own partner. Negotiating with a manager has a script everyone's already seen 100 times. Negotiating the shape of your own future family does not come with a script at all. It shows up in health decisions made unilaterally, too, which is its own quiet category. A woman downloads a cycle tracking app, watches the data accumulate for months, and says nothing about it to her partner. Not lying, exactly. Just privately managing her own uncertainty instead of turning it into a shared problem 2 people actually sit down and solve. And it shows up hardest in the couples who otherwise talk about everything else without any friction at all. Careers get negotiated in real time. In-laws get discussed at length. Whether to move cities gets a full pros and cons conversation over dinner. Then the kid question gets mentioned exactly once, gets a vague, "Yeah, someday, obviously," and both people quietly agree, without ever saying so, never to reopen it again. Not because it's actually settled between them, because reopening it risks finding out that it isn't settled at all. There's a generational wrinkle worth noting here too. Surveys comparing the two groups directly find Gen Z slightly more likely than millennials to say they've delayed having kids because of the economy. Millennials aren't the most avoidant generation on this. They're just the ones old enough now that the postponed conversation is starting to bump up against an actual deadline, instead of sitting comfortably somewhere off in the distance. Census data backs up how far this stretches once you zoom out to an entire generation instead of one relationship. In 2014, about half of women aged 25 to 29 hadn't had children yet. By 2024, that number had climbed to 63%. Some of that shift is genuine, deliberate delay, made on purpose with open eyes. But some of it is just the conversation getting pushed so far down the road that someday, quietly, gradually turns into probably not, without either person ever officially deciding that. None of this is actually about children when you get down to the mechanism underneath it. It's about what the conversation itself represents to the two people avoiding it. Saying, "Here's what I want, and here's the timeline I want it on," is a statement about the entire relationship's future that can't be casually walked back once it's out in the open. Talking about rent, or vacations, or whose turn it is to cook dinner keeps everything comfortably reversible. The kid talk doesn't work that way. That's the actual thing being avoided here, underneath the surface excuse of money or timing. It also explains why the avoidance survives even when both people, privately, already agree. Two people can each want kids, each assume the other one knows that, and still never actually say it to each other for years, because saying it out loud is treated as the moment the plan becomes real and enforceable rather than just comfortably assumed. An assumed future can't disappoint anyone yet. A stated one can. So the sentence gets held back, not out of disagreement, but out of a strange kind of protection against the possibility of being let down by a deadline nobody officially set. Nearly a third of Gen Z and millennials now say they don't have kids and don't want them, with almost 1 in 10 still sitting genuinely unsure either way. That entire range, want it, don't want it, honestly don't know yet, used to get sorted out in a single overdue dinner conversation between two adults. Now it increasingly gets sorted out by default, by however many years quietly pass before somebody finally works up the nerve to ask the question directly. Which brings it back to that guy, 29, product manager, 4 therapy sessions deep on this exact topic. He's not actually confused about what he wants, if you listen closely to how he talks about it. He's confused about what happens the second he says it out loud somewhere that requires a real answer back. The therapist's office is safe precisely because nothing has to change there afterward. The relationship is the only room in his life where saying the sentence out loud actually costs him something real. Everywhere else, the answer is just an opinion. In that one room, it's a plan somebody has to act on. If any of this landed, there's more of this on the channel.